Communicate, that's the word, communication. You have to learn how your spouse communicates. That takes time. Men and women communicate differently. It took me 2 years of marriage to figure out my wife will never tell me to do anything around our home. If Tammy wants me to do something, she'll ask me a question. It's from the question that I got to stand there and figure out what it is she wants me to do. Simple example, say I leave a pair of my underwear in the middle of the bedroom floor, which frosts my wife. That's her word when she's angry. That just frosts me, Jeffrey. If I'm not frosting her, I'm driving her up a wall. That's another one. Kids would come in. Where's Mom? She's up the wall with frostbite. That's all I know. You won't believe what put her there, man. It was that pair of underwear in the middle of the bedroom floor. You're looking at the most powerful piece of cotton on planet Earth. So I leave my underwear in the middle of the room. Would she come to me and say to me, pick those up? That's 3 words. Hey, pick those up. 3 words! Would she say them? No, because that would be simple, direct, and right to the point. And at that moment, we would be communicating at the highest human level. The way God, the Creator, intended it, through language. She looks at me, looks at my underwear, and then asks, are those yours? I sure hope they are, otherwise I got a few questions of my own. What do you want? That's the only question a man has for his wife. What do you want? Quit talking in code and tell me what you want. My favorite question, we weren't married 2 months. I'm leaving the house. I got golf clubs on my shoulder, got golf shoes in my hand, and everybody knows what she asked me. Where are you going? I was only married a couple months. I didn't know any better. I looked at I'm going bowling, Columbo. What do you want? If you're taking notes, that would be the wrong answer. An hour later, I was still in my living room. Come on, tell me, what is this about? Please, let me know, please. I can make the back 9, just let me know. It's about knowing the right answer. That's why your beautiful, intelligent wife would ask such a banal question. I know better today. If I'm leaving the house with golf clubs on my shoulder today and Tammy says, where are you going? We'll put these in the car, baby. I'm gonna come back and mow our lawn.
Communication. You and I, we must learn how to communicate if we're going to enjoy life, if you're going to enjoy yours. But have you ever thought about where we learn how to communicate? I mean, did we learn it in school? No. I mean, maybe parts of communication we did, but we learned math, and we learned science, and we learned writing, and we learned English. Not necessarily communication. We learn physical fitness, we learn history, but who teaches us how to talk in life-giving ways with the people that we care about? Okay, maybe you learned through your upbringing a little bit, sure. We certainly learn through our mistakes. You know, another place where I've learned a lot about communicating, Bluey. If that would have been around when I was a kid, I think I would be a way better human being than I am today. It's incredible. Just last night, Mary, my 8-year-old, was dispensing some life lessons that she learned from Bluey about how to handle your stress and some of your negative feelings. It was powerful. But I mean, if you think about, aside from kids' shows, where do we learn how to communicate? And I don't mean how to say words, I mean communication, the series of choices we make about what to say or what not to say, and how to say it or how not to say it. See, the problem is not in knowing the words, the problem is knowing which words. The choice to speak or not to speak. The choice of when we will speak the words that we choose to use, the choice of how we will share those words, what tone, what posture, what gestures. Because at the end of the day, communication is ultimately about connection. Connection with the world around us, connection with the people that matter to us. That's why the proverb warns us. We talked about this last week, that the tongue can bring death or life, and those who love to talk will reap the consequences. Which means every word you choose, every word you don't choose has consequences. And so if you want better outcomes, If you want better connection with the people in your life, you're going to have to learn how to make better choices. And who taught us about this? I mean, that's why I'm excited about this series, because I think we should talk about it. Our words matter sometimes more than we want to give credit to. Like we say, oh, we figured that out, but then we find ourselves in all sorts of conflict. And the choices that we make with our words not only impact us, they impact the people around us. It impacts the outcome of how your day is going to go. One word can wreck your day. It'll impact your employment, your future opportunities in your employment. It'll impact your family, your future family, your relationships, and your words are also important to God. Because one of the ways that God chose to reveal himself to us is to call himself the Word. Like words matter to him. And last week we talked about how words also reveal the health of our heart. We need to learn how to choose healthful and helpful words in our life. This statement is based on a verse that we looked at last week in Ephesians, and we're actually going to say it out loud at each of our locations or wherever you are tuning in from today, online, on TV, one of the men at Toledo Correctional, wherever you're at, I want to hear you. So Finley, lean in. White House, I know you're digging deep. Perrysburg, even though many of you are seeing me on a screen, I want you to say it out loud with me. So let's say this verse together right now. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. Great job. Now, what is this verse teaching us? Well, if you remember, unwholesome means rotten or useless. And Paul isn't talking about four-letter words. He's talking about the intent of our words, which can include four-letter words, but he's talking about the heart, the health of your heart behind them. Like, why are you saying what you're saying? Is it coming from a healthy place or not? And the second thing that he speaks to is, are the words helpful? Is it building others up according to their needs? And this is part of the challenge. What you need, what is helpful to you, isn't always helpful to them, to the people around you. The words that you tend to say, the tone that you tend to use, even the way that you listen is influenced by your temperament. Your temperament is the way that you and I are wired. It gets confused with personality. Personality is the way you express yourself. It's usually shaped by birth order and your childhood experiences and your upbringing, and it can change a little bit. But your temperament is the why behind your personality. I mean, as I said last week, if you're a parent of a young child, you see your kids' temperaments early. It's like eye color. It's like thumbprint. It's you. And what we don't realize is that your temperament influences the words that you choose to use. Your temperament is different than the person next to you, most likely. And your temperament not only influences the words that you choose to use, it also influences the way you hear the words others choose to use around you. So think about this. If we are going to choose helpful and healthful words, we have to understand how God's wired us, and we have to understand how God has wired them. We have to learn how to speak or at least respect each other's temperament language or native language. I mean, think with me for a minute. Have you ever traveled internationally? Gone to Mexico, Latin America, maybe to a European country where they speak a different language, tried to learn a few of the local words. It's kind of fun. You know, I've been on a few mission trips to Latin America, and even though I took 3 years of Spanish in high school, hablo un poquito español. That sounds impressive, but it just is me saying I only know a little Spanish. I mean, one of the things I enjoy doing when I go to Latin America is talking with some of the translators. They tend to be students, college students or high school students, and I love asking them about some of the words that they use. Like on one of my trips I took a couple years ago, I said, what word do you use for like awesome, when something is cool? And so I asked them, and I was surprised. When they think that something is sweet, a few years ago, they called it queso. I'm like, as in like queso dip? Like cheese dip? Like, you're telling your friends the new Call of Duty drops and it's queso? Like it's cheese? That's so weird, right? I mean, it doesn't It doesn't sound right. A word that means amazing to them kind of sounds cheesy to me, you know? It's funny, but then I started to think about some of the words that we use, like a sweet outfit is drip or fire. I mean, even the word cool. You like something, so it's chilly? Like, we get used to words based on your native language. I was recently having a conversation about how I was surprised that fanny packs, those belt bags, have made a comeback. And someone that I was having that conversation with gave me a look like, how could you say that? They were from England, and apparently, fanny pack is a derogatory phrase for body parts. So one person's fashion accessory is another person's vulgarity. I mean, think about that. That's strange. You would never think twice about that. But over there, it's like, whoa, unwholesome language. You know what this is called? This gap is called a language barrier. It's when two people have difficulty understanding each other because they lack shared meaning. This is what temperaments do to us. They can unknowingly create a language barrier. Yes, you may be speaking in English. You and I may be saying one thing from our temperament, but they are hearing something else. That's why I love this proverb. It says that with their words, the godless destroy their friends, but knowledge will rescue the righteous. This proverb is alluding to how our words have the power to destroy important relationships, especially when we haven't allowed God to transform our hearts into new people. Our words can wound, betray, divide, destroy. And I think we all get that. You probably have experienced it in your life. But what we miss is the second part. What is it that rescues the righteous? It's knowledge. Of all the things the author could have put there, gentleness, silence, encouragement, forgiveness, love, it's knowledge that rescues our relationship. It's discernment. The author is talking about wisdom, growing, yes, in our knowledge of God, but also in the wisdom or the way that we relate to each other. That is what rescues the righteous. The more we understand ourselves and others, we actually protect ourselves against the words that have the power to destroy. That's why this is important. So the bottom line is see the temperament to strengthen the relationship. You and I, if we're going to grow in our connection with people, which is something I think we all crave, we're going to have to learn to see the temperament in us and in them in order to strengthen the relationship. If we're going to choose words that are healthful and helpful, we're going to have to grow in our knowledge, our understanding, our discernment of their wiring and ours. And remember, this is not just about an assessment. This is awareness of how God, our Creator God, wired you. Psalm 139 talks about this. We looked at this last week. You, God, made all of the delicate inner parts of my body and knit me together in my mother's womb. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous. How well I know it. Do you know it? Do you know how God wired you? Have you taken the time to appreciate that? Because most people reject and look down upon the way that they're wired, the way that God wired them. They minimize it, or they compare, or they dislike, or they wish they were like someone else. And so hear me on this. If you can't acknowledge God's wiring or workmanship in you, you will continue to struggle connecting with Him because you're not acknowledging the work that God is, and wants to continue to do in your life. And if you can't acknowledge His workmanship in you, you're going to struggle to respect it and acknowledge it in others, which is going to cause a disconnection with the people around you. And so we need to see the temperament in order to strengthen our relationship with Him and with others. We need to thank Him for it. We actually have an assessment. Many of you have taken it, but I'm bringing a new one today in case you didn't have the opportunity to take the colors assessment before you came. And so if you wouldn't mind, you can look at these 4 shapes here, and I want you to get out your pointer finger, okay? And this is going to operate as a pencil. And so wherever you're watching, look at the screen, and I want you to point or draw the shape that you most resonate with. I want you to pick the shape that you think best represents you. And let's see if the shape that you drew and the color that you are matches. All right, that's a fun video that was really just created to capture the 4 main temperaments. These temperaments were first developed about 2,500 years ago by a Greek philosopher by the name of Hippocrates, and they've been adapted over the years, but this really just provides some language for us to talk about our temperaments, the way that we see ourselves and can understand each other. And so I'm going to walk through the titles, but I am a simple man, and so the colors are what's most helpful. The sanguines are yellow. The cholerics are red, the phlegmatics are the green, and the melancholics are the blue. And if you're looking for the shapes, this was the spring, this was the square, this was the sphere or the circle, and that was the upside down triangle. And so I want to hear from you. Wherever you're at, I want you to raise your hand. When I say your color, let me know that you're in the room. Where are my yellows? Yeah, that's right. See, that's the thing. They can't just raise their hands. They have to let us know that they're in the room, okay? They're popular. They love to have fun. Where are the reds in the room? That's right. They're upset that I didn't call them first, so you'll get over it eventually. Where are the greens in the room? Probably the easiest going group. Oh, yeah, they're just excited to be here and enjoying the fun. And then where are the blues in the group? Where are the blues? They're questioning the validity of the assessment at this point. They're not sure what I'm doing is legit. So, we do have an assessment that helps, and I'm just curious, those of you that took the assessment, how many of you had a strong combination? You had 2 colors that kind of came out at the top. Yeah, that's not uncommon, but here is how we break down at Cedar Creek. So we had about 4,500 plus people take the assessment, and so of all of the colors, yellow is 20% of our church, reds are 21%, our largest group is the greens, 31%, and then our blues are about 25, about a fourth of our church. Now, let me ask you the question. We know how long it took each color to complete. I want you to guess what color you think took the longest, okay? What color do you think it was? And if you guessed green, you are correct. Because the greens are like, I don't really know. They're kind of laid back, okay? It took them almost 14 and a half minutes. And of course, it took the reds a whole minute and a half less. They're very decisive. They're ready to go. Now, you may be wondering, like, why does this matter? Because each temperament is different. And if we are not going to let any unwholesome talk come out of our mouths, but instead only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. There are healthful ways that your temperament shows up, and there are unhealthful ways that your temperament shows up. And if we are going to choose words that are healthful and helpful, then we need to understand healthful words require us to see how our wiring shapes what they hear. Because as you'll see in a moment, each color reacts to words differently. And so I need to pay attention to how my red shows up, and I want to make sure it shows up in a healthful way, not a potential unhealthful way for the people around me. We also need to allow our temperaments to guide us towards helpful words, where we are letting their wiring shape what we say or how we say it. Because when you see your wiring and you see their temperament, you make choices that improve your connection. It helps you cross over that language barrier. Like, here's another way to visualize this. We talked about this last week, that the magic ratio for our relationships is that we need 5 positive interactions from the people that we care about to offset every single negative reaction. These negative experiences are way overweighted. They impact us way more than all of these positive interactions. And here's the thing. Oftentimes we know this, and so what do? Well, we try to give encouragement based on our wiring. And so we show up as a blue, or we show up as a red, or we show up as a yellow in their life. And if you notice, it doesn't really help offset, but if you show up according to their color, you bring helpful words according to their wiring, it has a disproportionate impact on that relationship. This is powerful. When we learn how to speak according to their color, their temperament, when we see the temperament and speak to it, it strengthens the relationship. Why? Because you feel seen. You feel known and loved. And when others feel seen and known and loved by you, they tend to reciprocate that back. I don't know if you've thought about this, but Jesus was great at this. There's a story in Matthew. It says, Jesus and the disciples left the town of Jericho. A large crowd followed behind. So visualize Jesus and a herd of people on their way to Jerusalem. 2 blind men were sitting beside the road, and when they heard that Jesus was coming that way, they began shouting, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." From the side of the road, these men are trying to get Jesus' attention. And in the ancient world, blindness was considered by many a punishment, a consequence from some choice that they or someone else made in their life from God. And so there was a tendency to look down on people who were disabled. I think that's why the people reacted this way. "Be quiet," the crowd yelled at them, but they only shouted louder. "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." When I read stories like this, it's easy to just kind of skim through the details and not reflect, but when I think about my life, when I'm honest with myself, I can do the same thing. I may not be yelling at them, but I'm thinking, like, be quiet. When I have places to be, things to do, when I think to myself, I don't want to waste time and energy on that, like, I can blow past people. I mean, these blind beggars were an inconvenience. Like, Jesus had some important work in J-Town. He didn't have time for them. And you know what the crowd was doing? They thought they were doing Jesus a favor. They were helping him out. But notice what Jesus does. When Jesus heard them, he stopped and called to them. "What do you want me to do for you?" "Lord," they said, "we want to see." Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes I read stories like this and I think Jesus asked some awkward question. Like, he asked these blind beggars, "What do you want me to do?" It's like showing up at a funeral and asking somebody, "How are they feeling?" It's like, well, I mean, they're obvious, right? I mean, what a strange question. Like, why is Jesus asking this question? Jesus, he knew what he was doing. He was seeing them. In the next verse, it says that Jesus felt sorry. In the original language, it's compassion. He felt deeply for them and touched their eyes, and instantly they could see, and then they followed him. Jesus just had compassion on these blind beggars when everybody else was too busy, caught up in their own agenda, caught up with their own view of the world. Jesus was seeing life from their point of view. For most, I don't know how long these blind men had been blind, unable to see, and as a result, probably felt unseen by anyone else around them. Jesus stopped, took the time to help them feel seen and heard by him, by asking a question, by allowing them to answer, and then touching their eyes. And the result is they became followers of him. That is helpful and healthful words. He could have just flicked his wrist. He could have just shouted, "Be healed." But instead, he took time to see them, to know them, to understand them, to see their wiring, to strengthen a relationship with them. That's why this is important. We're growing in our Christ-likeness when we do this. So let's grow in our knowing now. When you think about the four colors, hopefully you've been able to identify which one you most likely associate with. What is helpful is to understand that the yellows and reds tend to be extroverts, and the greens and blues tend to be introverts. And don't think about whether they like to be around people or not. Instead, I want you to think about words and how they use words. Reds and yellows are extroverts, meaning their thoughts and emotions go outward. They speak to think. They sometimes speak before thinking. They have no filter. So if you are a yellow or a red, this is your tendency. Whereas the introverts, thoughts, words, and emotions go inward first. They process it first. They think before they speak. And when they speak, if they speak, they've thought about it a lot. So when we see temperament, it strengthens our relationship. For example, you take a red and a green, okay? Two opposites that tend to react to life differently. It's very uncommon for someone to be high red and high green, high yellow and high blue. But if you think about the red wants to just hash it out. They're like, let's just put it on the table. Let's talk about it. Because in some ways, for the red, debate and hashing it out is the way you love someone. It's the way that you connect. Where the green, on the other hand, is introverted. And they want to think before they speak. And they want calm and harmony. But if the red keeps pushing, you put the green in a high-stress situation that doesn't feel very loving. And so maybe the green stays silent, which now means the red feels a little betrayed. Why aren't you engaging with me? So they double down and they start pushing, and then the green can't take it anymore. And eventually they lash out. And do you know what you have? The crazy cycle. I just explained why some of you get in fights over and over and over again. Because some unhelpful words trigger the green according to their temperament, and they react in a way that's natural to them, but it triggers the red, and so around and around you go. If you see the temperament, it can strengthen, it can bring clarity to your relationship. This is what Paul meant when he says, don't let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs. He's not saying ignore your temperament. He's teaching us to pay attention to ours and learn how to speak to theirs. Let me give you another example. Another way that we can miss each other, which leads to misunderstanding and a language barrier. If you look at the four colors, yellows and greens tend to put people before tasks. And reds and blues tend to get to work. They put the tasks before people. And if we're not careful, we can say things like, they don't care about people, and on the other side, they never get anything done. Do you see how it can lead to misunderstanding? I mean, take a yellow and a blue. How do you show a blue that you care about them? You do what you're supposed to do, when you're supposed to do it. And the yellow is thinking, well, why can't we just hang out? Why can't we just have fun? Well, I can't have fun because you don't honor your word. And this is, again, the crazy cycle. It turns into you can't, you always, you never. Why can't you just insert whatever? I mean, see, here's the truth. Just because, you can go to the next slide, just because someone says something hurtful, it doesn't mean that they are unhealthy or trying to be unhelpful. Sometimes, yes, but sometimes it's just a language barrier. And when you take time to see the temperament, yours and theirs, it can strengthen the communication and the connection that you have with each other. Take my temperament, for example. I shared my score last week. I'm a high red and a high yellow. And to those of you that know me, you are not surprised. But here's what that means. I extrovert my words. I speak. I don't think always before I speak. It can get me into a whole lot of trouble. Like when I looked at my assistant and I said, "What did you do when she had her hair done?" Yep, if you were here, you saw that story. I have 0 green and low blue. And so that means I'm not thinking always before I'm speaking. Here's the other thing. I have a combination of tasks and people, which means I can switch between both. I need to see my temperament clearly in order to strengthen my relationships. Because if left unattended, if I am unaware, I can unintentionally hurt, confuse, maybe even destroy or damage the people that I care about on my team, in my family, with my friends, even with strangers. And so as we walk through each color over the next couple of minutes and look at some of the strengths and weaknesses, I want you to pay attention to yours. And if there's somebody in your life that's a different color, I want you to listen to their strengths and weaknesses as well. Not to weaponize them, but to be aware, to see the temperament in order to strengthen the relationship. Yellows, for example. They see the best in people and in circumstances, and they have dynamic strengths. They can be magnetic storytellers who create laughter and joy. If you've ever been around a yellow, they can light up a room with their laughter and fun. They're dynamic, but they also have dynamic weaknesses. They have a tendency to elaborate and exaggerate, maybe even make fun of people at their expense. They can speak too loudly and dominate conversations. I've been accused of all of that. I've been guilty of all of that. Like, if this is you, see your wiring. Not just your weakness, but your strengths. Not just your strengths, know your weaknesses. So honor the way that God wired you, but know how sometimes other people experience you. My other color is red. Red tend to be visionaries and can see and achieve goals. They have powerful strengths. They can be dynamic leaders who excel at deciding and delegating. Reds love to get things done, but they can also have powerful weaknesses. They have a tendency to be bossy and impatient and may use a harsh tone. This is my highest rated color. When my wife and I were married for years, she would tell me, "You were a little too harsh." Like, "Why are you so harsh?" And I would reply, "It's just the way that I'm wired. Like, don't take it personally." So what did God do? God thought, "I know what I'll do. I'll give Ben a red kid." And so one of my kids is red, and I get to see their unintentional, harsh tone with me and their siblings. And I'm like, okay, now I know what it's like to be on the receiving end of red. And it ain't always fun, okay? And I'm not taking it personal. And if I'm not careful, I'll just fight back, See and honor your strengths, but also be aware of your weaknesses. When you see your temperament, it can strengthen your relationship. Greens stay calm. They stay calm in the midst of chaos. They have steady strengths. They can be loyal friends and make good listeners who are steady and patient. Man, it's so fun to be around a green when you're going through a crisis. But greens can also have steady weaknesses. They have a tendency to avoid conflict and can respond to stress by being slow and stubborn. Like, if this is you, if this is someone that you love, see your wiring, honor it, but also be aware of your weaknesses. As a red who has a green child, I have to slow down the RPMs and the tone. As a yellow, I have to give greens space to talk, because otherwise we'll just talk right over them. The last color is blue. Blue, they anticipate obstacles and creatively solve problems. They have deep strengths. They can be perfectionists who are detail-oriented, orderly, compassionate, and often artistic and or musical. They think and feel deeply, but they also have deep weaknesses. They have a tendency to be judgmental and critical and to remember the negatives. They can keep score. And so if this is you, honor your strengths, but be aware of your weaknesses. See, it's not helpful to say, this is just the way that I'm wired. It's also not helpful to try to be somebody different than you are. But on the flip side, don't demand others become more like you. Because when you see the temperament, it can strengthen your relationships. And so I want you to take a moment and think about your friends. I want you to think about you. I want you to think about your family. Your homework this week is to take a little time to see each other's wiring, to review your strengths and weaknesses. And next week, when you come back thinking about that, I want to help you become less offended and less offensive. We're going to talk about how our colors show up under stress and how we have a tendency to weaponize words and words that can wound us based on our temperament. It's going to be powerful. But for now, I want you to see your temperament in order to strengthen your relationship. Begin to lean into the way that God has wired you and the people around you. And this is so important, not just for your relationships, but for your spiritual journey. Because as Jesus followers, we're called to have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had. Though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to, but instead, he gave up his divine privileges and he took on the humble position of a slave. Think about what Jesus did for us. He didn't hold his position over us. He didn't demand that we meet him at his terms. No, he saw us. He knew us. He left the throne room of heaven, a place of privilege, and he came to do life with us. He took on the humble posture of a servant. He made room for you and me to be a part of his family. And so if we're going to become more like him, we're going to have to grow in our ability to make room for others, to understand, to see, to know each other. So I wonder, what is it that God's saying to you today? Maybe it's been far too long that you've been resistant to the way that God's wired you. Maybe today is the day where you see it and you thank him for it. Or maybe you just never really thought about the way that your temperament, your color, impacts the people around you. You don't know what it's like to be on the receiving end of you. And maybe God's trying to bring a little awareness to strengthen some relationships that you need to work on. Maybe you've been expecting people to meet you on your terms, in your preferred wiring, and you're not seeing and honoring theirs. What relationship is God inviting you to strengthen today? What is it that God's saying to you, and what are you going to do about it? Will you make that your prayer as we respond to him right now? Heavenly Father, thank you for the way that you demonstrated for each of us humility, leaving your place to meet us where we are. And so God, would you help us see and honor the ways that you've wired us, but also not let our weaknesses create a language barrier for the people that we care about. Help us to become more like you, to have the same humble attitude that you did as we lean into the way that you've wired us and acknowledging the temperaments of the people that you put around us. Help us to love them the way that you've loved us, making room for us. And so whatever it is that you're inviting each of us to do, God, we want to be responsive to you right now. We pray in Jesus' name, amen.